Welcome back, students, to your botany class once again. And we were discussing with ecosystem. And in the last class, we have stopped from decomposition. And we have learned a little bit about decomposition. And we know that decomposition consists of 4 processes. They are fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humidification, mineralization. So what is fragmentation or what is decomposition? As I've already said, decomposition is the breaking down of complex organic compounds into simple and inorganic substances, so that these inorganic substances are being made available to the plants. And in due course of decomposition, these decomposers like bacteria, fungi, or maybe even the earthworms, they are able to get their nutritional requirements from the detritus. And detritus are the leaf litters or the dead bodies of plants and animals. So the process of decomposition includes fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humidification, and mineralization. So fragmentation is the breaking down of the complex. Take for the example of a leaf. Okay, take for example of a leaf that has fallen into the forest floor or to the soil or to the ground. So fragmentation involves the breaking down of complex organic compounds, or the leaves is broken down into fragments. So that is the first part of decomposition, breaking down of the leaf into smaller fragments. Why is fragmentation necessary? Because it increases the surface area of the detritus. For the detritivores. Detritivores are those organisms which feeds upon the detritus. So fragmentation brings about the breaking down of complex organic compounds into smaller fragments or smaller particles, so that the surface area of decomposition is increased for the detritivores. And during the process of fragmentation, the nutrients are released, or the substances are released, where the decomposers also get the nutritional requirements. The next step in decomposition is leaching. So when the bigger particles or inorganic compounds are broken down into smaller particles or fragments, certain soluble substances or water-soluble substances or simple sugars, they are removed. They are removed from the detritus, and they percolate downwards with the gravitational water. So that is called leaching. And the next step is catabolism. So this in catabolism, the decomposers or the reducers, they secrete enzymes into the environment. So these enzymes which are being released or secreted by the detritivores or the decomposers, they break down the compounds into smaller particles, and thereby releasing the nutrients. And this decomposition of the organic compounds or detritus depends upon the quality or chemical content of the detritus. For example, compounds that are rich in carbohydrates or fats or lipids, they decompose rapidly, while that compounds that are rich in cellulose, lignin, or chitin, they decompose at a slower rate. So this decomposition requires the enzymatic reaction. It requires the enzymes that are being secreted by the decomposers. And these decomposers, there are certain decomposers which act specifically on certain detritus by secreting specific enzymes. In the sense that many of the decomposers, they are selective in decomposing the detritus. They are selective in decomposing the dead bodies of plants and animals. They are selective in decomposing the leaf litters or the leaves, dead leaves or branches or flowers by secreting special enzymes. So catabolism is the enzymatic reaction of the detritus secreted by the detritivores. Then the next is humidification. Okay, so now as the detritus is broken down into smaller fragments and nutrients are released or substances are released, humidification is the process of formation of a dark color amorphous substance from the detritus. And this humidification is the storehouse of nutrients. Then the next step after humidification is the mineralization. Mineralization is the final step in decomposition, where different kinds of nutrients, different kinds of inorganic substances like carbon or maybe nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, they are released into the soil. So from the soil, they are made available to the plants, and the plants absorb their nutrient requirements from the soil, and then upon the death of plants, upon the death of animals, they are again recycled back to they serve as raw materials for the decomposers to break down and then recycle again. So in this way, the decomposers brings about a recycling of the nutrients, recycling of the essential nutrients to the plants, to the animals, and all to the ecosystem as a whole. So another next function of ecosystem is the energy flow. The third function of ecosystem is the energy flow. Okay, energy flow or energy is the basic function, is the key function of ecosystem, and this flow of energy in the ecosystem or in the environment is regulated by two basic laws of thermodynamics. The first law states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So the first law of thermodynamics states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be transformed from one form to another, or it can be transferred from one component to another. So for example, during the process of photosynthesis, radiant energy from the sun or solar energy is converted into chemical energy. So that is proves the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be transferred from one form to another, or it can be transferred from one component to another. And the second law of thermodynamics states that no energy transformation is 100% efficient. Second law of thermodynamics states that no energy transformation is 100% efficient. In other words, it says that as the energy is transferred from one trophic level to another, or transformed from one form to another, there's always a certain percentage of energy that is lost as heat. There is always a certain percentage of energy that is lost as heat, and only a certain amount of energy is available to the next trophic level. So, second law of thermodynamics states that no energy transformation is 100% efficient. So, there's always a certain percentage of energy that is lost to the environment, and only a certain percentage of it is made available to the next trophic level. Okay, so as we discussed with this energy flow, we all know that the sun is the ultimate source of energy. The sun is the ultimate source of energy, and that can be depicted in a chart. The sun is the ultimate source of energy. The sun is the ultimate source of energy, or the solar energy is the ultimate source of all energy in the ecosystem. And the solar energy that comes from the sun, it consists of different rays like gamma rays, then ultraviolet rays, X-rays, then visible light, then so on and so forth. So the radiation coming from the sun, it consists of gamma rays, ultraviolet rays, X-rays, ultraviolet rays, and visible light. And so this is the portion with which plants can utilize it for photosynthesis. These are the rays which are gamma rays, ultraviolet rays, and X-rays. They are absorbed in the atmosphere, or they are reflected back. But this visible light, which has a nanometer of 300 to 700 nanometer, is the wavelength of light which the plants can use it for photosynthesis, and it is also called as photosynthetically active radiation. So, of the total energy, of the total solar radiation coming from the sun, 30% of the radiation coming from the sun is reflected back into the space again. Of the 100% coming from the sun, 30% is reflected back into the space. 20% is absorbed in the atmosphere, okay? 20% of it is absorbed in the atmosphere. Then 50% of the total solar radiation is made available to the plants for photosynthesis. But the plants do not use this whole 50%. The plant does not use entirely the total amount of this 50% of the sun's ray. It only uses a small percentage of this. It uses 1 to 5% of this 50%, or in other words, it uses only 2 to 10% of the. It uses only 1 to 5% of the total incident rays, or only 2 to 10% of the PAR. So the plant uses only a small fraction of this light. It uses only 1 to 5% of this total radiation come from the sun, or in other words, it is equivalent to 2 to 10% of this photosynthetically active radiation. So with this percentage of light, the plant carry out the process of photosynthesis. So as they carry out the process of photosynthesis, so also as we have discussed that during the process of productivity, that the plants also, they require energy, and that energy is released during the process of respiration. So of the total amount of energy that is produced, that is gross productivity, a certain percentage of that is again used for respiration. So of this total energy, of this total radiation, percentage of around 0.8 to 1 of this is used for respiration, or in other words, 1.6 to 2% of PAR is used by the plants for the process of respiration. So now, this is what is taking place at the producer level, green plants. So the amount of the energy that is available to the other trophic level is only around 10%. So only a small percentage of energy is available to the next trophic level because plants also, they require energy, and that energy is used up during respiration. So only a small fraction of the incident light is used by the plants during the process of photosynthesis, and this process of photosynthesis is equivalent to a GPP, or gross primary productivity. So now this is how energy which is being manufactured by the plants using the sun's energy during the process of photosynthesis pass on from one trophic level to another trophic level. So the plants, by the process of photosynthesis, they manufactured energy, which is stored in the form of carbohydrates in the food, and as the herbivore consumes the producers, the energy that is stored in the producer is passed on to herbivore, and as the carnivore uses up this consumes this herbivore, then the energy that is stored in the herbivore is now transferred to the carnivore, or the different degrees of carnivores or consumers. So that is known as flow of energy. The flow of energy means the movement of energy, or the conversion of energy, or the transfer of energy from one trophic level to another trophic level. But the interesting part is that, as we have discussed, only certain percentage, around 10% of this is available to the next trophic level. So suppose that in the first step of photosynthesis, suppose that the producer or the green plants has manufactured energy of about 100 joule, and the next, and we know that only 10% of this total energy is available to the next trophic level, in a sense that only 10 joules will be available to the herbivore, because only 10% of 100 is 10. And the next, again, applying the same rule to the carnivorous level, 10% of 10 is 1. So now the energy goes on decreasing as we move up higher. As we go on up higher in the trophic level, the energy available goes on increasing. So this law is known as 10% law, and this law proves the second law of thermodynamics, which says that no energy transformation is 100% efficient. So amount of energy available goes on decreasing, because majority of the 80 to 90% of the energy is lost as heat, and only 10% of that is available to the next trophic level. So the energy available goes on decreasing as we move up higher into the trophic level, and that law is known as 10% law. Okay, and as we discussed with this energy flow, this R indicates the energy that is lost during the process of respiration. Then this Nu, and there are certain Nu sign and A sign. This Nu indicates non-used or non-utilized energy and non-assimilated energy. So this Nu and Na are the energy or the energy that has been lost in the form of waste, in the form of dead bodies of plants, animals, or in the form of excreta or fecal matters which do not enter into the food chain. These are the wastage of energy. So these are indicated by Nu and Na, and so majority of the 90% of the energy is lost in this form as here into the environment, and only a certain percentage, 10% of that energy is transferred from one level to another. So energy goes on decreasing, and that is known as 10% law. And as we discuss with this energy flow, let's look into what are this. What are the trophic levels? What do you mean by the trophic levels, or what are trophic levels? Trophic levels means the feeding levels. Each and every organism in a community, or each and every organism has a specific place in the community. They have a specific place or specific position, feeding position in the community, and those feeding levels, they are known as trophic levels. And from the chart, we can know that the producers occupy the first trophic level, the herbivores the second trophic level, and the carnivores occupy the third trophic level, and omnivores the fourth trophic level, and the decomposers occupies the last trophic level. So feeding or these trophic levels can also be defined as organisms which occupy the same trophic level, organisms which derive their energy from the same source or derive their energy from the sun by the same number of steps. They are placed in the same trophic level. So all the producers, they derive their energy from the sun, so they are placed, all the green plants are placed under the producer level, first trophic level, and all the herbivores, they derive the energy from the producers, or they derive the energy from the sun by the same number of steps, that is, with the producer in between them, so they are placed in the second trophic level. Or all the carnivores, they obtain their energy from the herbivores or producers, or they obtain their energy from the sun by the same number of steps. As such, they are placed in the third trophic level. And all the decomposers, they obtain their energy from these producers, herbivores, carnivores, and so they are placed in the last trophic level. So this is how the trophic levels or the different organisms are arranged in a food chain, or are placed in a trophic level depending upon their feeding or nutritional requirements. And there are two types of food chain, grazing food chain and detritus food chain. So what is a food chain? It's a series of organisms. It's a series of organisms in a trophic level basing on their arranged basing on their nutritional requirements, or depending upon the source of energy. So grazing food chains, for example, is a arrangement of from the sun to the producer to the herbivore and carnivore to primary carnivore, secondary carnivore. And so this is a unidirectional flow of energy. The flow of energy in the grazing food chain is unidirectional, or for that matter, the flow of energy in the food chain is always unidirectional. It always flows from the sun to the producers, to the herbivores, to the primary carnivore, secondary carnivore, and so on and so forth. So in a grassland ecosystem, the producers are the green plants, and these producers, they are being fed upon by the herbivores, which includes the insects. And this, in turn, the primary carnivores feed upon the herbivores, for example, the frogs. Then they are fed upon by the frogs are eaten by the snakes, and the snakes are eaten by the hawks, eagles, etc. And in a pond ecosystem, a grazing food chain can be indicated by the phytoplanktons, which are small microscopic unicellular organisms which are capable of photosynthesizing. So in an aquatic environment, these phytoplanktons, they take the place of the green plants. So they are the organisms which carry out the process of photosynthesis, and these phytoplanktons, they are fed upon by the zooplankton, and these are small fishes or small organisms which feeds upon the phytoplanktons. Then these zooplanktons are fed upon by the small fishes, and the large fish feeds upon the small fish, and this large fish can be eaten up by the predatory birds. And in a forest ecosystem, grazing food chain can be indicated by the green plants, which produces the plants for food, produces the food for the deer, and the deer are being eaten by the tiger. So a grazing food chain, in a grazing food chain, it starts from the sun, then the producers, then the herbivores, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore, tertiary carnivore, and so the flow of energy is unidirectional. There's always a flow of energy from the sun to the producer. Then the next food chain is the detritus food chain. So what are detritus? Detritus are the fallen leaves or even the dead bodies of plants and animals. So the difference between grazing food chain and detritus food chain is that in grazing food chain, the food chain begins from the sun to the producer, while in detritus food chain, the food chain begins with the detritus. It begins with the fallen leaves, dead bodies of plants and animals. Then these detritivores, which includes the fungi, bacteria, protozoa, fishes and all, they feed upon the detritus. They are also called as saprophytes. Then in turn, these detritivores, they are eaten by detritivore consumers, includes the insects, larvae, the earthworms, and the millipedes. Then these detritivores, in the next trophic level, the small carnivores feeds upon the detritivore, and this includes small game fish, and subsequently, this large carnivores feeds upon the small carnivore, which includes the large fish and fish-eating birds. So detritivores or detritus food chain begins with the detritus, and it goes on to detritivores and detritivore consumers, small carnivore to large carnivore. So in both the cases of food chain, the flow of energy, the energy flows in unidirectional, and with each transfer of energy, there's a decrease in the amount of energy available. The energy is maximum here, it goes on decreasing subsequently. So also, even in this case, in detritus, the energy also goes on decreasing. So what we can conclude here is that as the amount of energy goes on decreasing at each trophic level, the trophic levels are reduced to, the food chain is usually reduced to 4 to 5 trophic levels, because the energy goes on decreasing. So the shorter the food chain, the greater is the energy available to the organisms that occupy the top trophic levels. So if a food chain is quite long, or it's long enough, then the energy available to the organisms occupying the top trophic level, or the carnivores, the energy will be lesser and lesser. It goes on decreasing, so also even the detritus food chain. So the shorter the food chain, the greater is the energy available to the next trophic level. And so because of that, in order to compensate that, the trophic levels or the food chains are usually reduced to 4 to 5 trophic levels. So with that, we can move to the next topic, that is pyramids of, or ecological pyramids. What is a pyramid? We all have a basic idea that a pyramid will look something like this, a triangle. So these ecological pyramids are graphical representation, graphical representation of ecological parameters like number, biomass, and energy. The producers the herbivores, the carnivores, they all are related to one another in these parameters. They're related to one another in numbers, in the parameters of ecological numbers, ecological biomass, and ecological energy. So this relationship, the relationship can be depicted. The relationship between producer and the consumers can be depicted graphically by using these three parameters. And they are called as ecological pyramid, or we can say pyramid of number, or pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. And this idea of ecological pyramid was first developed by Charles Elton, and it's also known as Eltonian pyramid. Okay, first, pyramid of number. So what is pyramid of number? Pyramid of number is the graphical representation of the number of individuals in a trophic level, of a food chain. So pyramid of number is the graphical representation or pictorial representation of the number of individuals present in a particular trophic level of a food chain. So when they are depicted in this type of pyramid, we call it as straight, and this type of pyramid is called as inverted. So in predatory food chain, for example, grassland ecosystem, or in case of forest ecosystem, the pyramid of number is always straight, because the producers which occupy the base, the producers always occupy the base of the pyramid. The producers, then the consumers, for example, herbivores, then the primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, so on and so forth. So these producers, they occupy the base, and then next followed by the herbivore, then the consumer, primary, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, omnivores. So in pyramid of number, the producers always outnumbers the herbivores. The number of producers is always more than the number of herbivores, and the number of herbivore is always more than the number of carnivore, and the number of carnivore is more than even the omnivores. So when this pyramid of number is graphically represented, it shows this in straight or triangle position, which indicates that the producers is more than the herbivore, and the herbivore is more than the number of herbivore is more than the number of consumers. And there is an exception in case of parasitic food chain. In case of parasitic food chain, for example, a particular oak tree, which has got which harbors birds. Take for example, there's a tree, and there are many birds that sit upon the tree, and these birds, they are the host of lice or bugs, etc. So in parasitic food chain, there is parasitic relationship, and in a parasitic food chain, the producer or the pyramid is inverted. It is opposite to this predatory food chain. The parasitic food chain is inverted in the sense that the number of producer, that is, there's only a single oak tree. The number of producer is lesser as compared to the number of birds, and the number of birds is again further lesser than compared to the number of lice and bugs. So the number is, the pyramid is narrow at the base, and it slowly broadens up towards the tip in case of parasitic food chain. So in case of parasitic food chain, the pyramid of number is inverted, while it is straight in case of pond and forest ecosystem. And the next is pyramid of biomass. Pyramid of biomass is inverted in case of forest ecosystem, while also this pyramid of biomass is inverted in a pond ecosystem. In a pond ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is inverted as the number, or as the biomass of the carnivores is always more than the biomass of the phytoplanktons. And in case of energy, the pyramid is whatever type of energy, the pyramid of energy in any kind of ecosystem, the pyramid of energy is always straight because the amount of energy available at each trophic level goes on decreasing. So these are the three ecological parameters which indicates the relationship between the producer, the herbivore, and the carnivore. And the last important function of ecosystem is the nutrient cycling. Very briefly, these organisms require the nutrients, different kind of nutrients, and they get these nutrients from the soil. And there are two types of nutrient cycles, sedimentary and gaseous nutrient cycle and sedimentary cycle. Example of gaseous cycle is the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, where the reservoir is the atmosphere. Sedimentary cycle is that of phosphorus, calcium, etc. So quickly, let's look into the gaseous cycle, taking the example of carbon cycle. And this gaseous cycle, the term is that the storehouse or the reservoir is the atmosphere, and this, in sedimentary cycle, the reservoir is the rocks. So carbon dioxide or carbon is an important constituent of the cell or the protoplasm. It exists in elemental state in graphite and diamond form. So carbon dioxide is present in the atmosphere, and it constitutes about, carbon is present in the atmosphere in carbon dioxide form, constitute about 1% of the total global carbon, and it is absorbed by the plants during the process of photosynthesis. Then it passes through the food chain, death and decay, results in the formation of releasing carbon back into the atmosphere. And in some those which are not released back into the atmosphere, during the process of death and decay, some of the dead bodies of plants and animals, they form the fossil fuels like coal, petroleum, etc. And upon burning, combustion of these fossil fuels, they are released back into the atmosphere again. So also, this, during the process of respiration of the animals, carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere. During the process of decomposition, carbon dioxide or carbon is released into the atmosphere. Then another source of or another area where the organisms can use carbon is the phytoplanktons, which are present in the aquatic medium. Phytoplanktons, as we have discussed, they are minute plants, and they can absorb taking carbon from the atmosphere during the process of photosynthesis, and they enter the food chain or food web. And these phytoplanktons are fed upon by the corals and seashells, and these corals and seashells, they get their carbon requirement from the phytoplanktons, and upon the death of plants and animals, upon the death of these corals and seashells, they are decomposed, and those organisms, those shells that are not decomposed, they are stored up in the sedimentary rocks, and during the weathering, they are released back into the atmosphere. Then the volcanoes, which also releases carbon into the atmosphere. Then this carbon dioxide comes in contact with the seawater, and they enter the food chain, which this food, when this food web, the organisms constituted in this food web releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere again. So this is how carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it enters into the biosphere and enters the lithosphere. So there's a cycling of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, from the non-living world to the living world, again back into the atmosphere again. So this is how the plants, animals, they get their carbon requirements, and this is how our activities like burning of fossil fuels and weathering of sedimentary rocks again releases back into the carbon into the atmosphere. And the phosphorus cycles, I will leave this to you, as this is quite a simple nutrient cycle, and I hope that you will be able to get this since you are familiar with this even in your class 11. So with this, I will wind up the function of ecosystem, productivity, decomposition, nutrient cycling, and energy flow. And I hope to see you in the next class with a new chapter. Thank you.